Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Very Not Random. Today it's going to be just me. Adrian's gone traveling, and I've got a guest on the show, EC Synkowski. She runs OptimizeMe Nutrition. You can find her at OptimizeMeNutrition.com, also on social media under that as well. And the topic for today's show is going to be Ozempic. I've been wanting to do a show about this for a while and similar products to Ozempic. And I wanted to bring somebody on that knows way more about it than I do. And EC works primarily in the nutrition space, and she's done a couple specific podcasts on this topic. So it should be good. I want to discuss both the pros and the cons. Here's her background, and we've had her on the show several times, and here's why I chose to bring her on. So she has extensive education in life sciences with a BS in biochemical engineering, a first MS in environmental sciences with a focus in genetics, a second MS in nutrition and functional medicine. She's a certified nutrition specialist and a licensed dietitian nutritionist, and she's been doing training and consulting for about 20 years now, and she's known for the 800-gram challenge and all kinds of really good info. But we enjoy having her on the podcast because she's no nonsense. Just whatever the truth is, she tries to figure it out. So this should be a good dive down that rabbit hole. As I say, we appreciate your... Oh, I should also say, we'd like to do a couple more shows about this. So maybe if you're a VNR listener and you have tried Ozempic, been on Ozempic, had a good outcome, a bad outcome, whatever it happens to be, post in the comments. Let us know if potentially you'd be interested in sharing your experience on the show. So that'd be fascinating. We appreciate your support. You want to help keep supporting the show? Go to verydnotrandom.com. Check out the cycles that we offer. There's all kinds of get your first fill in the blank, all kinds of bodyweight movements, strict pull-up, ring dip, muscle-ups, handstand walk, handstand push-ups, toes to bar, push-up, all that good stuff. There's barbell capacity programs, running capacity programs, on-ramp programs for new people getting back into fitness, body weight on-ramp, dumbbell on-ramp, barbell on-ramp, you name it, you got it. And then if you're a gym owner, you got to do all the stuff you need to do to manage your gym, right? Track fitness, manage gym and classes, take care of billing, and btwb has an all-in-one solution for that. So it doesn't matter what kind of gym you own, go to btwb.com and check out the all-in-one. So that's it. Enjoy today's show with EC. EC, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Pat?
Doing great. I can't complain. Had just a sugar-filled breakfast in preparation for this show to make sure that we're, I'm on topic. But no, all good, all good. It's the holidays are here, and I'm just trying to make sure I don't forget
Anything important?
somebody. Yeah, exactly. So that's it. But the topic I wanted to chat today was Ozempic, and I guess Ozempic. I'm sure there are several other products that are very similar that use a different name. So let's just say the catch-all of similar pharmaceuticals that do similar things.
Yes.
And it's all the buzz. It's everywhere. It's all over social media. There's all kinds of it's a savior from heaven. It's the work of the devil and everything in between. I know some people that have been on it and are currently on it. And your world every day is helping people navigate nutrition through various means, both probably what they do in the kitchen and also the between the ears aspect. So I figured I'd have you on for some no nonsense Ozempic talk.
Yeah. Let's do it.
I only know enough about it to be dangerous, but I can tell you what, one thing that seems apparent to me is it works. Because I see some people disappearing before my eyes, quite frankly. I know a couple of people and I see them every 6 weeks, and I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, whoa, it's happening. And so I don't think I can, from my perspective, question the efficacy of the actual product, but I don't know if, is there any rent check that's going to come due down the road or whatnot. So I guess maybe for the viewing audience at home, do you have a good working definition of what is Ozempic and similar type products?
Yeah. And Ozempic's really the brand name for when this GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist, so meaning it acts like the GLP-1 hormone, is used to treat diabetes, but then it can also be used to treat obesity. And like you said, there's a whole class of compounds that now are very similar to this, but can act in different ways and can act on different receptors. So sticking with Ozempic is fine. Um, but yeah, it's really a way that people can combat either obesity or diabetes. And I love what you said. I was actually really interested to learn about kind of what had happened to the people that you know that are on it,
Oh
because it
man.
is remarkably effective.
Whew.
And I think the first podcast I did on them, I think the title was something like a weight loss drug that works, like question mark, because
Right.
there have been a lot of attempts at this before, and this is one that does actually seem to be working and seems to be working quite significantly.
Man, no
And
joke.
and that's kind of what I think the big thing to highlight is when we look at diet and exercise, obviously that's the side of the house that I'm on, and I think everybody can benefit from diet exercise. But when we look at, on average, what benefits we see from diet and exercise, it tends to be about a 5% weight loss reduction.
I've
So if you were to
heard that
take,
number, which is staggeringly
isn't
low.
it? It's low. So if you were to take somebody who, let's say, is 200 pounds, we're looking at somebody maybe being able to lose like 10 pounds. And
Why?
the success, yeah, it is wild. Now, I think a lot of it happened. I
Well,
think there's
not
a,
not wild, but why? Like why
oh,
only
why?
5%? That seems crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I think some of it is crazy diets that people try, right? They go on the 3 shake a day diet and they wonder why they can't stick to it. So that's obviously what I try to help people with. But there is truly a biology that drives people to continue to eat to sustain their weight, and it drives them to keep that excess weight on the body more. I'm sorry, how should I say it? It's like it's stronger the heavier they get. So the further you get away from a healthy weight, the harder it's going to be to lose weight. It's still not impossible, but the people that we see who lose, let's say, 100 pounds and keep it off, they're
Mm-hmm.
very, very, very small majority. They're kind of like the unicorns, where
Okay.
more often than not, people will lose some weight, but then they have these hunger and these cravings that really drive them to eat and gain the weight back to their original weight. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, just willpower. That's a really easy out, I think, for people that haven't experienced that before, and especially once you kinda take into account our modern food environment, that if you dropped us all
Sure.
off onto a desert island and it was only strawberries and turkey, it's a lot easier to kind of navigate that versus being inundated with constantly. I think about it from a drug perspective. If you were an addict, but everywhere you go and every social event, it's always there, it's a much different ballgame, especially when your biology is driving you to eat. And I'll break in a second here, but one of the things I've heard about people who have this sort of drive to eat is it's like such a food noise in their brain. Like during the day, they're looking up menus and what they're going to have for their next meal. It's like constant. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
it's something I've never struggled with than to think about that. Like me looking up a menu for my next meals beyond like going out to a nice restaurant, maybe, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's something I can't even fathom doing, right?
Okay. Interesting. I got a couple
Yeah.
questions you sparked about that, but before we get too far, you mentioned one thing in passing
Mm.
that maybe you could chat about just for a second, because when I don't, if I don't hear Ozempic or another term, what I will hear frequently people just throw around is like the GLP-1, the GLP-1.
Mm.
And you mentioned
Mhm.
real briefly what it was, but that almost seems like it's being used interchangeably as to what, like these people are on GLP-1s or taking
Yes.
GLP-1s. Is that the same terminology, so to speak? And could you dive just a little bit more into like what's actually a GLP-1?
Yeah, so GLP-1 is glucagon-like peptide dash 1. It's a type of hormone that's released in the body. We have it's very short acting and it releases after we eat to help with satiety. It helps with slowing gastric emptying. It actually helps also increase insulin release, which is why these drugs are used for diabetes. But that's what these drugs chemically are trying to mimic. They're trying to look like that in the body. Now, what we do with it, with like the injectable form of Ozempic or Wegovy, is we make it such that it lasts longer in the body. They can take it, let's say, once a week in an injectable form, where if you were just to have the natural production in your body after eating, it goes away quite rapidly.
Mm,
So they've come up with these chemical structures that look like this molecule but can act in a more long-lasting way. Now, there's one form, the form that makes up the Ozempic is called semaglutide. That's the chemical structure or the name of the chemical molecule. But now there's lots of other chemical molecules that have this same sort of, they're called, a class of compounds that have this GLP-1 like action. So they're looking like GLP-1 in the body. They're hitting those receptors. They're helping trigger satiety. They're helping reduce cravings. They're helping reduce hunger. They slow gastric emptying. That's a big one. Keep food in the stomach longer. And those are the mechanisms that really are helping people lose weight because they're just not craving these foods like they were before,
Okay.
keeping them fuller
Right.
longer. So yeah, a lot of times people will use the brand names like you're sort of saying. Sometimes you'll hear it as semaglutide, which is the chemical structure of the GLP-1 in Ozempic, and sometimes you'll just
Okay.
hear people say GLP-1s to mean the broader category that would include molecules beyond semaglutide. And to be honest, all of the different ones are beyond me at this point. There's so much resources, so many different resources, and so much stuff coming down the pipeline, and what they're trying to do that act very similar to this.
So, from what you said earlier with that 5% weight
Mm,
loss, okay, and that I think you phrase it as like a drive to eat
hmm
and thinking about, food and menus and all that stuff all the time. So, when you hear those kind of stats, right, which stats can be your friend or they can be very misleading of, hey, you should potentially consider this pharmaceutical because statistically speaking, if you try to do it on your own, you might get 5%. It's probably going to come right back. And so why even bother?
mm,
Talk to your doctor.
hmm
That that almost makes it sound like it's impossible. And I'm not trying to belittle it. I'm trying to understand it. Is it that some people who have reached a certain level of obesity or whatnot have damaged their cells or whatever, I'm not speaking appropriately, but damaged their cells to a
Sure.
particular point where without some sort of like pharmaceutical intervention that's manipulating things inside your body, it ain't gonna work? Or if you could actually like monitor them 24 hours a day, calories in, calories out, and exercise level, the weight would still come off, but then once you are no longer holding them captive, they've got the drive to eat and they're most likely going to go back. So is it that the body is damaged and it won't work without this? Or does the old method still work, but it's just so darn hard to do for most people that the level of compliance is shockingly low?
Yeah, it's more the latter. I mean, you always what's interesting, I think it's very easy again for people who haven't been obese to just sort of write off the influence of the food environment. They're like, "Oh, just diet and exercise." But if
Mm-hmm.
you've always been healthy weight, or let's say 5, 10 pounds up, if you've always been something in kind of a vanity range of weight loss, it's not the same struggle. And so we always have to think about this as like, yeah, we could lock people away in a metabolic ward study and drive them to the weight
Mm-hmm.
loss that we want. Now, interestingly enough, I do think a lot of people are going to have to diet down at some pretty low calories to really make significant weight. But anyway, let's not get too lost in the details. For a lot of people, it's just not going to happen in a modern food environment. It's just not. And we have to be realistic about that. So now it's like, okay, well, now what? Because we want to reduce the health risks that they have from being obese.
Sure.
And I just want to go back to those, the percentage of the 5% weight loss. We do see some clinically significant improvement in health markers with the 5% weight loss. So even in that case of somebody who's 200 pounds and loses 10 pounds with, let's say, diet and exercise, that's still good. We still want everybody to do diet and exercise. And there's lots of other reasons besides weight loss to do diet and exercise. So that is still relevant and always still there. But when we look at something like these GLP-1s, they often will get people at least 10% weight loss, if not higher, 20% weight loss, and like, let's say 30% of the people who take it. And once you hit those levels, you're starting to look at preventing other diseases from coming down the pipeline or even being therapeutic, i.e., let's say reversing diabetes, right?
Oh, it's
So that's why
significant.
these, yeah, like it's not just, okay, cool, we lowered your glucose a little bit, or okay, cool, you just have less pressure on knees. Great outcomes. We love them. That's kind of in the 5% range. But now, once we look at 10 to 20%, you could actually have people eliminate the potential of becoming diabetic or even, let's say, reversing diabetes or significantly reducing cardiovascular disease risk. And so that's why these drugs like have gotten so much press, is because they're hitting these levels that are
Mm,
kind of unprecedented for weight loss drugs. Really, the gold standard before these GLP-1s was bariatric surgery, in which we saw upwards of 30%-ish weight loss for people, which is just huge and kind of another outlier. But if you kind of just kind of think about that as a scale, we got diet and exercise on average at 5%. Of course, there's outliers, but across the masses, we got about 5%. These GLP-1s are kind of in the 10 to 20% range. And then bariatric is up near 30%. You can see why they're becoming so popular. They're clearly above what diet and exercise is doing on average.
And who is the ideal candidate for something like this? And I'm sure as their market for the company is probably everybody. And
Yeah.
maybe that's the answer. Like again, I don't have a dog in this fight, but who's the preferred person that you're like, you know what, you're a great candidate to try one of these products?
Yeah, obviously, if somebody has like diabetes, because that was the intended use. Semaglutide, or what's sold under Ozempic, was originally approved for diabetes, I believe, in 2017, and it wasn't until about 2021 when that same molecule, but in a different dose, was approved for weight loss. And so that's really what's kind of sparked the big popularity of it. So if somebody has diabetes, that's a disease to manage it just like other chronic diseases that we have with some medication. But then in terms of weight loss, the person would have to be considered overweight according to their BMI, which is 27, greater than 27 on the BMI scale, plus a medical complication because of their weight. So something like,
I
okay, you're
see.
overweight and you have high blood pressure, or you're overweight and you're pre-diabetic. So that would be one way to get in approved. The second category would be if you're just considered obese by BMI. So those would be the cases of when, from a weight loss perspective, somebody is indicated to go on the drugs. For people that want what I like to call vanity weight loss, or just weight loss for aesthetic reasons, diet and exercise is your magic pill.
Okay. Um, so like I said, just from my limited experience of people that I know, like, holy cow, it works, like beyond a
Mm,
shadow of a doubt. And people that I've seen for years. And so I have a sense of what they eat at breakfast, or, we
mm,
go out to dinner or whatnot. And now that has changed dramatically. Like I see the portion size of when they quote unquote report like, I'm just full, and they push the plate away. In my head, I'm like, wow, really? Like, that wouldn't fill me up. And I'm half your size or something like that. Like, that's crazy that you're currently full. And I guess it's cool, but it also seems wild to me. Like, like to have something, for lack of a better way to say it, artificially manipulated to such a point that it turns off it just like a switch. I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. And maybe it's crazy and it's all good, but it seems shocking and crazy. And what I think is, okay, it works. This person really seems like their appetite has been curtailed. Like, seems like they're less hungry, or maybe like you're saying, the food stays in the stomach longer. Or like whatever it is, it's working. And maybe you've got a goal of 50 pounds, you've got a goal of 60 pounds. And from what I can see, it looks like you're going to hit that goal, like, because you're marching
mhm.
forward aggressively. When you do, you're still going to wake up the next morning in the same modern food environment that you entered in. And
Mhm,
where's the end of the journey, I guess, or are you just on it for life? And that's what I'm not quite sure about.
mhm. Yeah, and the research to date suggests that people are gonna have to be on it for life. It would be basically equivalent to a lot of other the medicines that are used, let's say to treat high blood pressure, to let's say to treat high
Interesting.
cholesterol. Yeah, you're gonna have to be on it for life for most people. Now, of course, with biology, there's always a range of everything, right? So it's impossible to say across the board.
Sure, sure.
I have had people, kind of with my diet approach, be able to wean themselves off. Some of my affiliated coaches also have had clients who have been able to wean themselves off. I think if you're going to be able to wean yourself off, guess what? You're not going to be able to do the 3 shakes a day diet. We're going to have to switch the whole lifestyle towards more whole
Right.
food, unprocessed diets. We're going to have to make sure that we're exercising, all of the good stuff that you know.
Because unless one
I
of these people is in some sort of a community, there's no educational lifestyle component associated once you go pick up your prescription.
Yeah, and this is why I think CrossFit probably has a larger percentage of some of these dramatic weight losses than, let's say, other people that just go on quote diet and exercise, because
Mm,
they have that whole community, they have that whole lifestyle change, they have that whole identity change. And that's really necessary for people to make these changes. But I do think, and this is again, I have a limited experience with this. I'm not somebody who prescribes these. Actually, as a sort of a little tangent, I probably get a higher percentage of people who have a poor experience with them because they have to come back to diet and exercise. So I've had more than one clients who have to go off them because of the nausea and the side effects, and it
I
really
say
didn't work for them.
I'd like to hear both sides. I'd like to
Yeah.
hear that too later. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I probably see that a little bit more than, let's say, all the people that are super successful with it. But ultimately, I think if people are able to wean themselves off, besides the diet and exercise that we mentioned, I think it's probably going to be people who are more, let's say, in the 30 upward to 50-pound range, where when you're looking at something like 100 pounds plus, I think it's going to be a very small, if not zero percentage of people who are able to really take themselves off. In fact, there was one study where I think it was about after a year of taking it, they split the group where some people got to continue to take it and some people went to a placebo. The people that continued to take it continued to lose a little bit more weight. The people that went to the placebo basically ended up at only an overall 5% weight loss, what we would expect with diet and exercise. They regained the weight back up to only
Interesting.
losing about 5%. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say again, I barely graduated college with a degree in sociology. Like, this is not my field. But I've observed human beings for a while, and I'm like, this
Hmm.
is going to be either people are going to stay on it forever, or this is going to be yo-yo central. Of I lost a
Hmm.
ton, I'm good. I'm going to get back to regular life. Pop tarts are still delicious, and I'm going to start,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden it's back, and then I get back on. Like I could just see this like never-ending cycle, or that kind of like you said, I feel like you just got to stay on it. So I'm very curious to see. I know it's all the rage right now. What does this discussion look like in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
Because I guess are you familiar like when a lot of companies say that yes, we have done long-term studies,
Mm.
and that maybe that's a moving target as well. Are there decent long-term studies of this? And if so, do you know what they've shown?
Yeah. So the good news is this class of drugs, and that's the thing, is like they have all these different molecules that fall under this class of drugs. So not everything that people are taking right now has been studied for this length of time, but this class of drugs has been used for treating diabetes since 2005.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
Ozempic, correct, with the semaglutide molecule was approved in 2017. Now, that's not 30 years, but at least, we're not looking at something that was literally developed last week, right? It's been
Mm-hmm.
through millions of people to treat diabetes. And then they were like, oh, wow, there could be some enhanced weight loss with this. Let's play with the dose. And that's how we got Wegovy in 2021. So this class of drugs is certainly not new. I think the type of compounds that they're using and the doses that they're using are. And so what they often look at is like person years, that maybe something's only been into play for like since 2017. But when you multiply it across the number of people using it, we have a lot of data to suggest it's safe. But if you're somebody who wants to know exactly what this looks like 30 years from now in people that have been taking it for 30 years, we certainly don't have that. And that's why I think it's really important for people to think about this as not a vanity drug. Is I'm taking this because I have other complications due to my weight or due to obesity, and the risk benefit is worth it. It's worth it for me to lower the risk associated with my weight or associated with diabetes, and I'm willing to accept the trade-off versus thinking that this is just sort of poof, I'm going to look like the cover of a magazine. Right? It's not about like this alleviates everything and you're going to be totally happy and you're going to look like whoever you want by taking this. This is okay, the option of me taking it and the risk of me taking it is worth it compared to the risk of me staying on my current trajectory.
And then if somebody is going to have some sort of success without it, there has to be maybe well, maybe the field does already exist, like some sort of, I don't know, whatever it be, community, online course, books, literature or, mental health intervention, because these people are dealing with genuine addictions. Like you said, if you haven't gone down that road, it's tough to relate as to what that drive to eat could possibly feel like, and how strong that calling could be, and like what actually would work to potentially mitigate or curb that. I don't have the answer to that. It seems like an entire another cottage industry.
Yeah, there's this book, yeah, Magic Pill by Johann Hari. I'm looking on my bookshelf there. And he is somebody who has been on Ozempic, or I guess I should say Wegovy for weight loss. And he goes over some of the science, but I think he also does a really good job sharing personally some struggles with it. And actually, I had a client write in about this as well. How to say it? That there's that phrase, it's like wherever you go, there you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people who have gone on the drug, again, this is from my experiencing seeing people who really are looking at the diet and exercise angle, is that there can be a lot of emotional stuff around eating that you think, oh, I just have to lose the weight, but you don't realize that you haven't yet dealt with the emotional stuff. And he talks about that and how he feels a little bit more lull, and how like a lot of his life, like food was about happiness and stuff like that, and how taking away some of those relationships can be challenging. And that's what one of the clients that I had wrote in, and it's just like, yeah, their significant partner relationship is around a lot of food. And so can you imagine, like, if
Right.
you remove that as your cultural connection and just how you spend time and how you enjoy, it's like, okay, well, what's left? It starts to ask some really hard questions for people, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's like, oh, I just want to lose this weight, but sometimes we don't see how it's connected to so much of our life, right? And so you can end up
For
having
sure. Oh, for sure.
some things besides the biology drive to eat that maybe you didn't really recognize at the beginning of the journey, like, oh, I just want to lose weight, right?
Mm-hmm. Does it not self-regulate? Does it evolve with you or whatnot? I guess what I'm trying to
Mm,
say is, from my own personal experience, like you said, keeping names out of it, but I sat across with this person. They stated that they were full at breakfast with a portion of food that I was shocked.
mhm.
And they're still in the weight loss journey, but okay, if you're going to be on this for the rest of your life, in that, and not, I'm judging it by one meal, right? But this
Sure.
is, you can paint the picture. It looks to me like you're chronically undereating, which is probably why you're losing so much weight. Like, are you going to be chronically undereating forever, and then you're lightheaded and dizzy? When you reach a certain thing, what if you try to exert yourself physically? Or if you're on this thing forever, does the portion, quantity, caloric density have any ability to kind of fluctuate? You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you do have to remember that people who have excess mass, they are drawing on some of those reserves for some of their
Mm.
energy, right? So there is some of that. I do worry a little bit with if they're going to get enough nutrition. In fact, one of the things that happens with people who have bariatric surgery is they're supposed to post surgery meet with a nutritionist, because the logistical issue of no longer having, a normal sized stomach, let's say, is that you won't be able to fit the same volume of food in each day, and that's why their portions are so small. But because the portions are so small, they're supposed to meet with a nutritionist to make sure, okay, in those small
Oh,
portions,
right.
are you still getting enough iron? Are you still getting enough magnesium? Are you still, blah blah blah, and go down all
I
the
never
different.
thought of that.
Right. And so they're supposed to meet with people. I don't, unfortunately, I've worked with many clients who haven't. But they're supposed to do that to make sure that, okay, are you actually still getting all the nutrients you need? And so I wouldn't be surprised with on some of these GLP-1 drugs if, especially from an essential nutrient point of view, we start to be limited, which is not ideal either. Right. And so that would be ideal for them to make sure that in their small portion sizes that they're not going to become deficient. Now, thankfully, the body's remarkably resilient. It's not going to happen in 1 or 2 days.
Right.
But
Yeah.
certainly long term, it would start to be a concern for me. It's like every day you only eat a cup of food. Like, how is that actually providing enough of the nutrients you need?
Yeah, because the person that I'm thinking of, they're also trying to work out appropriately while this is happening. And several weeks ago, there was like a death by calories on the air bike that occurred. And
Mm,
there's a interval-based style, high intensity sort of a deal. They're significantly calorically restricted, and they reported that they knew their old stats, so to speak, and very quickly, nowhere near their old number, they felt like they were just going to pass out on the bike and had to stop. And I was like, it's just so new. I was like, I've got so many questions, and it's so interesting, and I don't know what's sustainable and not sustainable. Like, can you be working out in this sort of a state? Is it a good idea, or you're just barely taking in enough calories that you should just go to work, go home, and chill a little bit?
yeah, I would definitely recommend working out. The interesting thing, especially if somebody's not eating a lot, I wouldn't be surprised if they're kind of just more low carbohydrate by way of the very low volume.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like they've become low carb keto, and they're going to do these airdyne sprints, and they wonder why I have no energy. It's like, yeah,
Right.
because your muscles are tapped from using up the carbohydrates as the main source of energy, and now your body's trying to use fat, which just doesn't produce power quite as quickly. And so this is
Mm-hmm.
why for CrossFit, I don't recommend a low carb diet, but I wouldn't be surprised if the phenomenon is happening something similar to this person, simply because by way of the low volume, they're low carb. They're not necessarily trying to be. But I definitely recommend working out, because this is a super common question that people ask is, people are very concerned about loss of muscle mass. That's something that's been kind of put
Oh,
out there in the
yes, yes,
space
yes.
is, yeah, like if you go on these drugs, you're going to lose all your muscle mass. And so you definitely want people to be, especially resistance training, while they're
Lift some
doing this.
weights.
Yeah, lift some weights so that we can keep some muscle mass on the body. For one, for all the benefits that muscle mass brings, but two, having more muscle mass is going to help minimize the deficit that you have to create. So it's a good place to be. It helps burn more calories for muscle mass on the body.
Uh,
Now,
oh, go ahead.
I will say that if you lose a significant percentage of your body weight, there's no way that you're going to prevent any muscle mass from being lost.
Right.
But you have to remember that the end result is overall healthier body composition. But if you keep the protein high enough, kind of around the zero point 0.7 grams per pound that I recommend, but that would be of their target weight in this weight loss
Mm.
scenario, and you do some resistance training, you're going to keep enough muscle mass on the body. You're not just going to be losing muscle mass. It's not like you just all turn to only a lighter weight and all fat. So I definitely recommend it. But I do think you bring up a good point by way of their low food volume, that perhaps they're going to feel a little less powered during CrossFit style workouts. And it might just simply because of a lower carbohydrate intake.
That makes sense. Um, what did I just have? So, I mean, it's overwhelmingly sounds, quite positive. Like really, like it works. There's a ton of benefits, the whole 9 yards. Is there another side of the coin, concerns, cons, or things like that? Or is it shockingly just mostly pros?
Um, I guess I would say it's mostly pros. I mean, again, I deal with people who haven't been successful with it. I would say more often than not. In my experience, I don't deal with a lot of people that are just loving it because otherwise, why are they coming to me, right? They're coming to me
Sure,
because
right.
it hasn't been working. So, like I said, I've kind of dealt with people who had to go off it because of the nausea. And what they find that's kind of the big drawbacks or side effects or kind of GI distress, nausea, vomiting type of stuff. And it looks to be about in the single digits percentage of people who drop out from these clinical trials, which is certainly on a lower end for clinical trials, but that is, of course, across millions of people, going to be lots of people who did not have a good experience. So there's that um, associated with it. I think in our current food environment, I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think, as much as I love nutrition and as much as I think it's really powerful, you have to be honest about the stats on average. It's not going
Mm-hmm.
very well. It's
No.
actually going quite terribly. I think it's now 74% of Americans are overweight or obese in the US. I mean, that's insane. Like in terms of just like, wow, that's a lot of people. And yet every single day I'm talking about nutrition and there's so many people out there giving good information and that's the thing is people say, oh, people need more education. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of people doing a lot of good work, and we've had recommendations that make sense since the 1970s by the USDA. Like, I don't think this is just nobody knows
Mm-hmm.
what to do. I think there's another driving force here. And until we crack down, in my opinion, on the food environment in some realistic ways, I think this has to be a solution for people to really get them to a better place than where they are now, health risk wise.
I mean, both of us living in the US, you know the deal. I mean, everywhere you look, everywhere you turn, you stumble over a jumbo-sized portion of something laden with fat, sugar, and salt that tastes
Amazing.
absolutely amazing. And it's so much food that it should fill you up, but somehow you want a bit more at the end of it. And it's not overly expensive and it's ubiquitous. Like, yeah, it's a tough road here. I mean, potentially globally, but I think in the US we are kind of leading the charge as to making it really hard to avoid high volumes of crappy food that has, 3 days worth of calories in one meal.
Yeah. And I think you and I were both recently in Scotland.
Yes.
And, I wouldn't say that necessarily the food in the UK, in my experience, is definitively always better than the US. But it was very obvious, once again, a reminder how much portion sizes were different. I
Portions are
remember
crazy.
I ordered a dessert and it was like the size of a little like spoon. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. Even though it's still processed, it's still the portion. So definitely in terms of portions, the US is off the charts. Um, and there's for your listeners, there's a Dr. Spencer Naldowski. He is a obesity doctor. He prescribes these drugs and he puts out a lot of good information, in my opinion. And he said something that really kind of stuck with me. And I think it's helpful for people to hear, especially when people believe that nutrition should be the fix for everybody. If you know somebody who can eat whatever they want and not gain weight, we always just say, oh, they got lucky genetics, right? We just write
Mm,
it off as like, oh, they got good genetics. Well, what about the people who eat whatever they want and gain a lot of weight? So
mm-hmm,
there has to be a genetic card there too. And so what's happened in our modern food environment is it's just kind of amplified that genetic um, card, right? And
mm-hmm.
so it's not saying that weight loss isn't possible, but in our current environment, I think it's unrealistic to think that our current methods of just preaching more broccoli is going to work for everyone. Certainly, there are going to be people, and the less of a weight loss process they need, less weight that they need to take off, the more likely they're going to be successful. But our trajectory is such that we clearly need some other intervention. And I think right now this is a good ad for sure.
I would say so. Yeah, the food environment is so catastrophic. My wife and one of my kids went to Italy over the summer, and they went to like get gelato someplace, and they reported, they're in line with all these Italians, and it was just like one scoop, like one relatively
Exactly.
small, like
Like
what
a
we
kid
consider ice
size
cream.
here.
Yeah, a kid size, exactly. It was just bloop, one scoop. And like you can't even get something that small in the US unless you're
No,
like bringing like an infant into a restaurant. Like there's
correct.
no, and it wasn't even an option. I mean, the size of a small, if you have small, medium, and large at an ice cream shop in the US, she's like, my wife said, like, the biggest ice cream that they saw was smaller than our small, and like you had
Yes.
to search it out. Like it wasn't easy to find, and that like play that game with so many other
Everything.
things, and then the chemicals and the food and the processing and all that. It's you know, I don't think I told you this. I've played with so
Mm.
many different sort of nutritional things over the years. But do you know like the one thing I never actually really gave a whirl was paleo?
Mm. Hmm.
Like I was a bunch of zone because I didn't want to give up certain things, body by bread, and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff, but I tried paleo over the summer for like 2 months. Like I gave it a no kidding, real like hardcore. Like I'm not going to chew a stick of gum. Like
Right.
just to really do it.
Okay.
First of all, holy cow, it works. And second of for me anyway. And second of all, it was so illuminating to me because it forces you to seek out unprocessed food if you're really doing it. I remember being at a family, I think we went somewhere with my wife's family, extended family for like 4th of July. We rented like an Airbnb, and I walked into the kitchen and people had brought all these dishes. Everyone brought there's food everywhere in the kitchen, filling all the counters. And I walked in, I looked around, and I was like, I literally can't eat any of
Can't
this.
eat anything. Right.
The kitchen
Anything.
is full, corner to
Full.
corner of platters of food. And if I'm actually eating unprocessed food, I can't eat a single spoonful of anything. It was, even after as many years I've been doing this, it was like kind of shocking. And it was just interesting. The food
Yeah.
environment in the US is we got something special happening here.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, back to the UK, I wanted a latte in the morning as like my breakfast. They didn't even have a large. Like, can you imagine in the US, like not offering a large?
Oh, there's there was again for the listeners outside the U.S. Promise you, I'm not lying. We took our kids to a water park. I think it was in Idaho over the summer, and I'll have to. There was this frozen treat that you could get at this water park only in America. It was a soft serve ice cream cone. They would have like what would be like a venti, like a 20-ounce
Yeah.
cup from Starbucks, like a clear plastic venti cup in one hand. They have a small like sugar cone in the other hand, and they would turn on the soft serve machine, and they would make this cone literally about 1 foot high, like a third of a meter high. This is not a joke. And then they would just go bam and dunk it into this thing and smash all the ice cream in, and then just they were handing them out. The line was a mile long. It was, even by American standards, it was a shocking quantity of food, and people are just pounding them,
Lined up.
pounding them.
And
And
it's a snack. It's considered a snack.
well, yeah, it's man, it's crazy. And so I think there's some things like that that some Europeans would be like, wait, what? What do you
Hmm.
guys have in there? Before we take off, you mentioned one or two things that
Mm.
you said were interesting, and maybe you could say why. One of them was that the food stays in the stomach longer,
Mm.
and you kind of said that was an interesting component about that. What's the thought process behind that? I mean, does it just make you feel full, or and it sounds like if the body was designed appropriately, is it weird to make something stay longer than it naturally should?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is exactly why whole foods are quote magical, or the magic of, let's say, the 800-gram challenge or adding whole food lean protein is when food comes in a real food matrix, it takes longer to digest, and so it ends up staying in the stomach longer. And
Okay.
there's a lot of different reasons why we feel full. It's not comes down to one characteristic, but one of the things that makes us feel full is our stomach actually has to stretch to accommodate the food, and we have these mechanicosensors that sense the mechanical tension in the stomach stretching, and that goes via the vagus nerve to the brain. It's like, hey, I've got food in my stomach, I don't need to eat. So that keeping stuff in the stomach is a big part of us feeling full, feeling satisfied, like we don't need to eat again. Now, why it's kind of a double-edged sword with the GLP-1s is I have a feeling that's part of the mechanism for the nausea, right? Like if you just always
Ah,
feel like you have all this full feeling, it's also like, oh God, I feel like I'm gonna barf, or oh God, I just feel so full, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword of where we want that feeling of fullness, but I have a feeling that's also related to some of the side effects why people can't stay on it.
okay. Is there anything that we should have chatted about that we didn't?
Um, I think we covered it. Definitely the CrossFitters are always interested in the muscle mass aspect that I think we covered. I think we covered the fact that people are going to probably have to stay on it, especially the more weight that they want to lose. Yeah, and I mean, I think also too, it's probably very obvious, but it's really worth talking to your doctor. We don't have data again on 30 years of people directly taking this one drug and the doses. So there are some risks that they have to look out for, but that's why it's like I don't prescribe this stuff. I'm not a doctor. So you have to go to kind of figure out family history, increased risks of other
Mm,
things before figuring out, oh, besides I meet the BMI qualifications, that maybe this could be something, for you.
okay. Well, as always, EC, much appreciated. Let people know they want to find out more about you, follow your information. Where can they do that?
Yeah. OptimizeMeNutrition.com is the website. Optimize Me Nutrition on, let's see, Instagram and Facebook, and then the Consistency Project podcast.
Very cool. Well, you might be our highest repeat guest here, and
Yes.
I love having you on just because it's just in a world of nonsense, you're generally no nonsense. Let's just get down to the truth. It works, it works. It doesn't work, it doesn't work. And here's why I think it, which is refreshing and cool. So I definitely recommend people give you a follow, and I'm sure there'll be something nutritional wise we want to talk about in the future. And until then, I will. I'm sure I'll chat with you between now and then. But thank you for your insight.
Thank you, Pat. Always a good time.